particularly online. The meeting, as you know, has been conducted from the Chamber through Microsoft Teams platform. Now, please ensure your microphones and cameras are off before we begin, and I'll ask Councillor Finlay Stewart to lead us in a word of prayer.
Gracious God, our loving Heavenly Father, as we come before Thee at this morning hour, we give Thee thanks, Lord, for this day, and we give Thee thanks for another day on mercy's ground. And we praise Thee and thank Thee for every mercy and blessing that again is ours on this day. And Lord, as we meet here together for the first meeting of this new year, we thank Thee that we can do so, and that You have afforded us the means to do so. Lord, we ask that You would be with us at this time, that You would watch over us, that You would keep us. We come, Lord, confessing our own sins before You, confessing sins of thought and of word and of deed, but giving thanks that we have one to come to, and that we have one who has paid the price for our sins. And we again give thanks today for our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, who died on Calvary's cross and took our sins upon His own shoulders. So Lord, be with us, and we pray, Lord, for this committee meeting. We pray, Lord, for the convener and the leader and the chief executive and all heads of department. We pray, Lord, for all staff. And we give thanks, Lord, for those who have worked on these reports in front of us. Again, Lord, that You would be with them and bless them and keep them. We remember those, Lord, not as fortunate as we are on this day. We remember those, Lord, who have difficult providences in their own lives. Maybe, Lord, mourning and maybe in beds of sickness. We remember them. And we, Lord, especially this morning, remember the family of the young girl, the Stornoway primary pupil, Amy Wallace, who passed away, Lord, in recent days. That Thou would, Lord, be with them, and that Thou would uphold and keep them in these difficult days. Remember, Lord, everyone who has difficulties and difficult times. Oh, Lord, be with them and be with us now. And Lord, help us in any decisions we have to make, that we would do them, oh Lord, that we would that You would guide us in all the decisions we have to make, Lord, and be with us. Go before us now and forgive us for our many sins. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Now, those who give me these briefing notes clearly have little confidence that we as members can remember how we conduct ourselves on the Teams meeting, and have asked that I just remind you all of the process. If you're a member of the committee attending remotely, please leave your camera on and your microphone switched off. Officers, please leave both off unless you're called to speak, to report or answer a question. A reminder to those members in the chamber of the queuing system. If you wish to ask a question, please leave your microphone on in case you wish to come back with a response. And committee members will be given priority to speak. In regard to declarations of interest, members must leave the chamber or end the call if you are coming in remotely. Finally, a reminder that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording will be made available on the Comhairle's website following the meeting. And I am also ruling that item 6A on your iPads, I trust that you have had them updated, as urgent to allow members to consider the health and social care performance prior to the end of this Comhairle, which we are fast approaching. And just before we begin the meeting proper, I'm pleased to inform you that HHP has recently completed a development of 8 new flats in Tarbert. The new flats, to be known as James Place, will be officially open next Tuesday. The new homes are named after a policeman with Harris connections called James Morrison, who was sadly killed on active duty in London in 1991. In addition, HHP are due to complete a further 8 houses in Barvas later in February, and in March it's anticipated that 10 new homes will be finished in Ballavany. I think that's really encouraging news that these homes are being built in our rural communities and addressing the problem that we are well aware of. Leading on from discussions on fuel poverty, as members will recall at our last meeting, The leader and the director for communities will be meeting with Patrick Harvey, MSP, the Minister for Zero Carbon Buildings, Active Travel and Tenants' Rights. This meeting is due to take place next week, and we'll discuss the issues of heating systems and the withdrawal of support for certain types of heating systems, which impact quite significantly on our island communities. So we look forward to hearing how that progresses. And in regard to the new regulations, again, which we discussed at previous meetings about smoke alarms, the Scottish Government has announced an extra 500,000 funding for Care and Repair Scotland to assist vulnerable households. The local Care and Repair scheme, which is delivered by TIG, will receive a share of this funding. TIG has already assisted over 100 vulnerable households with the first tranche of funding that they've had. And also the local Fire and Rescue Service has provided advice and assistance to homeowners. It may even have provided some practical support with the appliances, and we may learn some of that later. The Scottish Government has also confirmed that homeowners, and this is important to allay any concerns, that homeowners will not be penalised if they need more time to fit these alarms. So it's good to hear that. So that's all of the information before the meeting proper. At item 1 of the agenda, we have the minute of the meeting of the 30th of November.
Chair.
Yes, Councillor Murray.
Councillor Gordon Murray, Stornoway North. I wasn't at that meeting, but the minutes are in front of us, but I did listen to the meeting on YouTube, and I believe there was a mention of a report that was going to be discussing the terms and conditions of care workers to go to PNR, and it didn't go to PNR, but there was an update, and I expected that the report would have been at this committee for this time. You know yourself more than anyone else how valued the care workers are in our community, probably doing the most important role in our community at the moment. And it's just a bit disappointing. So maybe urge you to see if we can get that report for PNR or full council so we can discuss it and move forward and value our care workers as soon as we can.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor. I shared concerns you have in that regard. And you may recall that subsequent to the discussion at committee, there was some further offline discussions held, and I think there was a verbal update given by the leader at a subsequent PNR. I think there's ongoing work in that, and I think we may be able to get some more information on that later on under the Health and Social Care Performance Report. But as you know, and as you recall, the terms and conditions of employee is not for this committee. There is a procedure and a way of dealing and reviewing that, and that is being followed up, as I understand. I don't know if the leader, do you want to add anything to that?
I will. I'll let the Chief Executive come in shortly, but just to update, yeah, it's precisely because we value them so much that we want to do this properly. And you'll recall that in the chamber at the meeting, there was a suggestion that we should try and find out what the care workers themselves thought. So we committed, and everybody agreed to it in December. We committed to do a survey, which I think Councillor McLean was hopeful it would be anonymous, which it was. And the survey has been completed in the time allocated. We now have feedback. The staff are analysing the survey. The very clear outcomes as to what the care staff want around two particular areas, which I won't update at the minute because they're still working on it. But yeah, we hope to, I'll give you another update at PNR next week as to where we're at with that. But we will do it properly, and we want something that will be embedded and will help to retain and attract staff. Quick fixes, staff were not so interested in quick fixes. I can say that they were interested in a revision of the way their job is viewed, and that's what we're working on as quickly as possible. So staff have been kept in the loop on that, and we are working at it. I don't know if the Chief Executive wants.
Thank you very much, Leader. Chief Executive, do you want to add?
Very little, Chair. Just to confirm procedurally, employee matters are for Human Resources Subcommittee and Policy and Resources Committee, and that is where the report will go. But my recollection is there is an update report for next week's meeting of Policy and Resources Committee, but Mr. Mackay can maybe confirm.
I'll check that, but I think we are due to be a report back on that.
Do you want to come in?
Yeah, Chair. It's in one sense encouraging to hear that there is work going on, and that's in one sense. But we're down here towards the end of our term, 5 years, and I remember bringing this up in my first session in this council 5 years ago, Chair. You were, and you yourself were behind this as well, and to have the feeling that we may not see this in this term is a bit too lengthy, in my opinion. I know exactly where you're coming from, that you want to get it right when you do it, but really this should have been, and we all work in hindsight, fair enough, but to come to the end of our terms here, and many of us, well, all of us are coming to the term in another couple of weeks' time, and to see that we haven't really moved on this problem in these 5 years. It's a bit disappointing, to say the least. But what I'm going to ask is will we see anything? We're obviously going to get an update at PNR. That's an update. Could we finalise anything by March? Doubtful.
I cannot comment on what we can finalise by March. I would expect that what we can do, we will do. We won't do something simply to get it quickly to a committee for a quick fix. But if we can get, I think we all want the same thing. We want to reward our care workers fairly and appropriately. There are issues around, obviously, other aspects of pay across the authority, and one change in one area can impact on the other. But we will not be inhibited from doing a change with care workers, which will reward them appropriately and change the system so that the rewards are appropriate. The deployment, the issues that we've all spoken about, they're deployed fairly, and the conditions of service reflect that. And I think we also have an issue, I won't preempt anything, but we also have an issue with different care workers to different levels of work and require different skills. And the problem that has been identified very clearly is that the different levels of skills have not attracted different rewards, and it should in any fair structure. So I think we've got to the bottom of it, and we now will find solutions. But I'm confident we'll get it right. I was with you. I think I myself asked early on for a seminar, early on in this term, a seminar on this particular issue, and we started working on it. And it is regrettable that it's taken this long. There are intervening factors, but I think we now have a goal ahead of us, and we're basing it on actual lived experience of the care workers themselves, rather than any anecdotal evidence. So I think we're in a better position than we've ever been to sort the issue.
Thank you, Leader. I do share the concern of all members in this matter, and the frustration that it is taking so long to address. With every passing week, almost we're risking losing more and not attracting in the numbers that we need because of these issues that need to be addressed. So I'm absolutely 100%. And as many of you know, offline, I've had many discussions and been pushing for this. And I'm equally frustrated that it's taken so long for us to get some light at the end of that tunnel, which is appearing now. I'm seeing Councillor Norman MacDonald. You want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm not a member of your committee, not a MacDonald Skira row. I too find myself in a situation similar to Councillor Colin McLean. I think my first intervention at any Comhairle meeting was to address the issue with where we were with social care when Ron Curry was in charge. And again, 5 years down the line, and I do find myself, I'm sure Councillor Murray will be surprised that I agree with everything that he said there. We are in a situation where we really need to get behind the most vital workers in our community. But I do find it galling that it's taken 5 years to even get to the stage where we're discussing a report and where we're going to address this. I see from the report that's been submitted that we have 38 vacancies within the Comhairle. There were 78 applicants, and we only addressed 20 of these by so there's a 53% uptake on us delivering on on recruitment. And recruitment and retention and advertising was one of the things that we've been banging on about for a number of years. I still don't see in our local papers, a big glossy, come and join us, the work is rewarding, etc. Kind of, I don't know, all-encompassing advertising where we're looking, not just a bland something in the Gazette or something in Heb News or whatever it goes, we love Stornoway. There's not much inventiveness being done with the advertising campaigns when we're trying to recruit. I don't know what's been done in terms of addressing where we were before. We were talking about exit interviews to find out why people are leaving the care service. Over the last 10, 15 years, an awful lot of people have left the care service. And I'm sure this survey, which is anonymous, will have gone partly towards finding out the reasons why people are left and what they want just now for us to deliver in terms of their package, remuneration, all the other aspects of what we're going to provide in terms of supporting them in their role. It doesn't need to be necessarily monetary. Shift patterns, etc., do help with retention and giving our carers what it is that they want to be able to do their roles and feel fulfilled in their roles. I think it's vital, if we do nothing else before we finish this, that we conclude with a proposal that goes to PNR in respect with their terms and conditions. And I can see no other objective at the end of 5 years that we actually do something concrete in this regard. And if it's taken 5 years, then it's good that it's coming to a finishing line, but it's far too long. And I think if this is the speed that we operate at as a Comhairle, and I've found that things tend to drag, then hopefully the next Comhairle, whether I'm part of it or not, will be able to do things with much more expediency, because this is tortoise-like in the extreme. But I commend the report, and I hope things go well going forward, and I hope we do get a proposal out that does reflect the value we place in our carers.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor. I've allowed a fair bit of latitude in that. We are actually on just the minute of the meeting, but I know it's a matter of great concern to all members, and that's really why I didn't intervene there. But what we have on the agenda at this point is the minute of the meeting, which I think has been accepted and for approval. The next item on the agenda is the declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they have in any items of the agenda. It would be helpful if members express why they're declaring an interest in the item concerned. And members in the chamber, please do so now by pressing your microphone or through the Teams platform using the raise your hand function if you have any interest to declare. Councillor Norman MacDonald, if that's not a legacy hand, I take it you're wishing to declare an interest. Councillor MacDonald?
Apologies, legacy hand, I'll take it down.
Okay. No expressions have been. And if during the course of the meeting you find that an interest does arise, please indicate it and it'll be noted. The next heading on our agenda item is Police and Fire, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, performance against the Fire and Rescue Plan for the Western Isles. I'd welcome Mr. Dougie Campbell, local senior officer, to the meeting. Mr. Campbell will speak to the report detailing the performance of Scottish Fire and Rescue Western Isles. And Mr. Campbell, if you highlight the main salient points of your report, and if members do have any questions, maybe raise them at the end of your presentation. Mr. Campbell.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction there and the opportunity to present the report from Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and provide some background to the content held within. If I can just bring your attention to priority 1 to start with there, and that's our promoting personal safety and welfare, or well-being, should I say. The accidental dwellings statistics there on the table 1 were quite static over that 5 years, but obviously I would like to bring that number down considerably. So work is still underway to drive down the numbers of accidental dwelling fires that we're experiencing, although the numbers are still quite low. The second table there shows our casualty numbers. Again, this year we've experienced very similar numbers to previous years, except for that small spike that you'd see in the 1920 reporting year. As indicated earlier on, our crews are still involved in the risk rating of homeowners on their request and fitting interlinked detection in homes and most vulnerable members of our community where they fit our criteria. So we're still experiencing quite high volumes of calls relating to this. And as also pointed out earlier on, TIG are still assisting with fitting detection where appropriate. We're still carrying out the previous mentioned, or I mentioned it previously at meetings, with the Safe and Well project. So I'm delighted to say that's pilot is now underway. COVID certainly had an impact on the rollout of this, but it's now underway. And it's, in simple terms, it's basically a home fire safety visit, but taking a more holistic view to safety within people's houses. So I'm delighted to say that that's now progressing in the Western Isles. Under priority 2 there, we've got the non-domestic fire safety. Now, legislative fire safety visits are continuing and they're focusing still on the sleeping risks that we've got. We have 2 fire safety enforcement officers visiting Island in Q4 to progress this further as well. We have a slight increase in the instance in this reporting year. To be honest, there's no common issue associated with this. And thankfully, most of these incidents were restricted to the initial source of the fire and limited the damage to the first compartment involved, or indeed that first item that was on fire. SFRS are looking to advertise for an auditing officer to carry out visits in the Western Isles. Further details on this will follow, but I'll be looking for partners within the groups to share this advert, and hopefully we can find a suitable candidate for us to drive this forward. If we could take it to priority 3 now, so that's emergency response, preparedness and community resilience. Our availability has certainly been affected by COVID-19, although our statistics are lower than national average for absence over that period. I think we're sitting at about 24%, which is lower than the national average. If I can also bring you to the candidate numbers that are on there for each station. Since the report has been processed, we've actually managed to update that and sanitize the list somewhat. So we've managed to get the more appropriate numbers the last 3-4 days it is actually. So kind of delighted to say it's higher in most areas. So Benbecula, we've got 7 candidates currently on the list. In Barra, we've got 4. Loch Boysdale, we've got 4. And then in the Lewis and Harris sector, we've got Valtos with 2, Lochmaddy with 1, Bayhead with 1, Tarbert with 1, and newly added 2 for the Stornoway area as well. So that's certainly positive. On the recruitment side as well, we're carrying out a process now called the pre-engagement plan, which is driven from Group Commander Hammond's RVDS support group. And it's already showing to have a positive impact on our candidates, where they're introduced into stations prior to their start date, and they have a far better understanding of the requirements and what's expected of them should they be coming to the service and join us as firefighters, and that's proven to be really positive already. There's been quite a big change in the UFAS and what fire alarm signals in priority 4. The statistics are very similar to previous reporting years, so if I may take just a small period of time to explain where SFRS have gone with a change in policy for UFAS. So there's reasons why we did it, and how we pushed this forward was we did a review and consultation process. So if I may cover why we did it and why we carried this out. UFAS accounts for an extremely high number of incidents as attended by Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. And this stat is reflected in the Western Isles. So why are we doing what we're trying to do here is to reduce the impact of UFAS. So our resources then will be more available for genuine emergencies. We'll reduce that blue light journeys that we carry out, and that'll improve crew and community safety. That'll reduce our carbon footprint also. There'll be free up funding for use that can then be used in a more productive manner. It'll reduce the impact on primary employers, which is critical in an area where it's RVDS environment that we've got in the Western Isles. We'll provide time for additional training, upskilling the staff, and provide more time for the preventative work that's all important to us in areas like this. So to get to the decision, we consulted and we reviewed the processes that we did, and we've come to our decision on the final option that we went for. We started off with 15 response models, and that came from an appraisal exercise. We narrowed that down to 5 options with stakeholder workshops. That came down to 3 options that we went out to public consultation. The consultation results and recommendations then taken to our strategic leadership team. That was in November last year, and that was recommended and agreed by the board on the 16th of December and approved, should I say. So the outcome was what was called option A, which is call challenging for all automatic fire alarms for non-domestic premises unless they're exempt. I can go through the exemptions if anyone's wanting me to go through them afterwards in the questions. But where it stands just now is we've got no response, or once we bring it in, should I say, no response will be mobilised if that question is undertaken and there's a confirmation there's no sign of fire or there is no fire. And the implementation of this preferred option will come in April 2023. So that's the current position with UFAS for the whole of Scotland. And the forecasted potential outcome for that will be what we're hoping to do. It's been estimated a national reduction in UFAS of about 57%, which, as I touched on, will make savings as far as costs go and also improve the safety of the community. So hopefully that gives you an overview of the unwanted fire alarms, the signals that we've got and why we've gone down the process that we have and the potential outcome that we've got. So thank you for your time, and obviously I'm happy to take any questions that you may want to pose to me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell. Just on the matter of the new regulations and the linked smoked heat and the CO2 detectors that are now required. As I said at the beginning, I think the Scottish Fire and Rescue has been actively involved in that, giving both advice. And am I correct in saying, have you been installing or giving some alarms to members of the public as well?
We have, yes. We've been fitting alarms in the following a risk rating or risk criteria, and at the end of that, it defines whether somebody is entitled to get the free smoke detection, interlink detection. So yes, we have been fitting them in the areas where people are most vulnerable.
Can I just ask, are you doing that in consultation and collaboration with the likes of TIG, who are also doing the same exercise? Yeah.
Yeah, we're working alongside TIG. The way it's sort of playing out is people are coming to us first, asking for our advice. We're then doing the risk rating. If they fall out with our criteria, they then go to TIG and follow the process through that way.
Very good. Well, it's really encouraging. I think it's very helpful to the vulnerable households particularly. But I do understand, just related to that, I do understand that TIG are availing themselves of their services for non-vulnerable households as well. If householders wish to pay the basic price, I think TIG are offering to install these alarms. So that may be something that members may wish to be aware of and pass on to people in their communities. Councillor Ian MacLeod and then Councillor Keith Dodson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, I think we've spoken about this before by telephone, but the availability of station is just quite worrying, and I've had quite a few people raising concerns about this. For example, Comhairle and Comhairle are two that quite often there's no available cover, which is not a very good situation to be in. I appreciate you are pushing recruitment and that, but one of the barriers that seems to come up from a lot of people say is that the 2-week initial training is what puts them off. And I think we spoke before about whether this can be broken down into smaller chunks. Is there any movement on that?
Thank you for the question. Yes, the group that Gavin Hammond, Group Commander Hammond, is currently undertaking is looking at all the options that we've got to us. We tried a process in Orkney where we broke it down to 2 4-day courses. It benefited in Orkney the way it played out there over the first course, and then we found it not so beneficial going forward. I understand that the hope to bring it in from the 2-week course, the concerns that are being raised just now are the end product, if I'm honest. The 2-week course absolutely fills all the criteria and the needs of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to put a firefighter out at the end of that 2 weeks who we feel is safe to be put onto a fire ground. And every element within that 2 weeks is crucial to that end product. But it's certainly something we're looking at is possibly making this into a modular course, that some of the elements can be carried out prior to the start of the physical element of the course, and then bring the course down to possibly a week from there. Certainly a project we're looking at, but it's not progressed too far from the last time I spoke to you on the telephone about it.
Thank you very much, Doug. I wondered, Councillor MacLeod, are you aware, is it employers unwilling or unable to release people, or is it just the personal commitment of a period of 2 weeks? That's the problem. But please to hear that there's at least an attempt to make it easier. But then again, you don't want to compromise the quality of the training in any way either.
Yeah, it's probably a bit of both. I mean, some people get 4 weeks leave a year, and to use 2 of them to go on to this training course, you know, it's a big commitment. But if it was based over a weekend with a Monday and a Friday being thrown in as well, you know, they're only using 2 days.
Absolutely. I think certainly we would encourage employers to be sympathetic for this kind of community service, which is so vital to our remote island communities, that we have that capacity available, and it's for all our benefits really. So I'd certainly encourage employers to be sympathetic in allowing employees to. I don't know whether the loss of pay is that an issue for these, Mr. Campbell. I don't know. Are you aware of what the exact nature of the disincentive is?
For myself, sorry, I never quite got the question there. Apologies.
Are you aware of from those that are reluctant to commit to the 2 weeks, what the nature of that reluctance stems from, so that it could be possibly addressed in some way?
No, it's to be honest with you, it's not something that's really brought to our attention very often. We have other barriers that seem to prevent us in recruitment, but the 2 week course genuinely doesn't seem to be the barrier in the Western Isles. There's lots of other elements where we have eyesight seems to come into it, etc. But the reluctance for the 2 week course hasn't really come to the fore very often. But as I say, it is something that Gavin Hammond's project team are looking at, and again, perhaps return to that exact model that we talked about there of the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday over 2 different weeks, and bringing that down to 4 annual leave days for anybody who's joining us. So we are trying our best to try and improve the numbers that was talked about earlier on. On the Mbekula front, I think all members will probably remember we did a large recruitment drive in Mbekula and indeed in North Uist as well last year. And we're hoping to still see the benefit from that going forward, including the course that finished last week, where we added 2 further firefighters to the Mbekula unit as well. So hopefully that will give us the opportunity to put that second appliance out to any emergencies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell. Councillor Keith Dodson, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the worries that amongst the elderly relating to the interlinked, the alarms, etc. If a smoke detector goes off in the kitchen, etc., we presume then it sets off the other ones in the house. A lot of the people were asking, if one sets them off, how do you switch them off? Now, if you switch the smoke detector off or etc., does it automatically stop the other ones from ringing the bell, sort of thing? It's just how do you switch them off? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's a hush function that's on all the detectors that works through the interlinked system. So when you hush one detector, it will have the same impact on the other detectors. So they're not switched off as such, but they're just paused is probably a good way of putting it, until you can clear the smoke that's caused the issue. And then they reset themselves and they all come back online at the same time.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Campbell. No other questions or comments at this stage? Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Campbell, for your report. As always, it's much appreciated, and the work of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in our communities is invaluable, and particularly the changing nature of the work, where community involvement and working with other agencies is becoming much more the norm now, and we're all interdependent really. So thank you very much for the report and for your attendance today.
Thank you very much for the time. Thank you.
Okay, we move on to the next item on our agenda, to the performance reports, and a number of ones within a main report. And if I can just ask the Director to take us through the performance management report for Q3 of this financial year. And we have consumer and environmental services, housing, municipal services and energy contained within the body of the report. Director.
Thank you, Chair. As you suggest, the key service areas for this committee are consumer and environmental services, which is at 6.1 of the report, and housing services at 6.6. Key performance issues around consumer and environmental services are around, the completion of the trading standards audit. The other key thing for the service in the quarter was the restart of programmes that were impacted by the pandemic, in particular the restart of the food law inspection programme, which restarted in September. So in that quarter, the service carried out 220 food inspections. They issued 14 temporary closure notices for algal toxins and issued 99 export health certificates. So a significant amount of work and effort required to begin to restart these programmes. Under housing service, the key focus still remains on the housing programme, and you mentioned at the beginning, Chair, a number of developments that are about to complete. These are included in the 200 units presently in development, and 161 units have been completed since the beginning of the programme. In December, the Council leader met with the Cabinet Secretary to discuss flexibilities around the present housing programme. A number of flexibilities were suggested to the Cabinet Secretary and discussed at the meeting, and I think she was very positive in regard to these. So we're keen to test some of these flexibilities and get some thoughts and projects around flexibilities into government as quickly as possible. At 4.1 of the report, I'm noting that there is significant pressure on the medical adaptations budget. Our members will appreciate this is a demand-led service, and we're anticipating that the budget will be exhausted before the end of the 22-23 financial year. Housing services have been meeting with health and social care colleagues to explore potential solutions, but that is an area of increasing concern. Summarised financial information is outlined at 9.1. In that, we're anticipating an underspend of £25,000 in consumer and environmental services due to additional impact income received, but an overspend of £40,000 in housing services due to costs related to the homelessness services. By downward pressure on costs, we're hopeful over the final quarter of the year to bring that overspend down a bit to ensure that the committee and the services come in at budget. There were no complaints in the quarter, and happy to leave it at that, Chair, but to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKeever. Can I just, you made reference to medical adaptations and the pressure. I think we did raise this at previous forum, and I think at PNR. I think we all appreciate the invaluable work that this does within our communities, enabling people to stay in their own homes for as long as possible. And I think when the leader spoke previously about this, I think there was an undertaking to look when we're reviewing your capital spend and over the remainder of this of the programme, that some consideration would be given to bolster this budget, which, if it is exhausted, then it would just bring down really a guillotine on our ability to adapt homes, which is, as I said, it's just invaluable to people to enable them to live comfortable lives in their own homes. And then from just a naked financial point of view, if people are not able to be accommodated in their own homes, they would then have to be accommodated elsewhere and at considerable cost as well. So there is a financial element to it as well. So, Leader, you will recall that we had that discussion, and perhaps if you could indicate whether this will be given some consideration when there is a review of the.
Yeah, just to confirm that we do see it as an invaluable service and something that's worthwhile carrying on, obviously, and we will allocate resources to it. We hope to come forward with a commitment to replenish that particular budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader. I think that's encouraging to hear. Councillor Keith Dodson.
Yeah, thanks. It's just a small note, Chair. If relating to a big thank you to the cleansing department for their operational matters. I get a lot of feedback from the community relating to the work, the bins being emptied, etc. during these troubled times. If that can be passed on to them, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dodson. From my own past association with that service, I very much value the work they do day in, day out, from one end of the year to the other, with only 2 official days holidays they have. They provide a tremendous service, whatever the weather is. They're out there collecting our bins in a very seamless way. So thank you for that, and I certainly endorse that. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not a member of your committee. Something that's very much at the back of my mind is the impending increase in electricity prices. That's not very far away, and the impact that that is likely to have on people and the costs of running their homes, and the fact that more and more people may be driven into being homeless because of that. And how do we deal with that situation? I know that much of the report that we're dealing with here is in regard to HHP housing, but I'm assuming that we hold a record of private housing, and I wonder to what extent we are in a position to use private housing. I mean, we have a good relationship with HHP with regard to helping people back into tenancies. To what extent do we use private? And it seems to me that we may well have to use private a great deal more in the future if the number of people in poverty increases along the lines that has been suggested in the press recently.
I entirely agree with you, Councillor McCormack. The heinous increases in energy costs that are going to hit all our communities and disproportionately, again, hitting our island communities. And I would hope that that may be one of the matters under discussion on the forthcoming meeting with Mr. Harvey. If you could just allow the director to come in if you could.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is an issue we can take up with Mr. Harvey, although I don't think that will be under his particular remit, but I think we will mention that. I think that the leader has proactively written to both Ofgem and the UK and Scottish governments, making points around the impending increase in electricity costs, the impact it will have on fuel poverty in places like the Outer Hebrides. So we've suggested a number of potential solutions, ranging from derogations around price increases to the removal of the distribution surcharge for the north of Scotland. So we've proactively written to government, making these points. So we'll see what reaction we get from both governments and Ofgem around these suggestions we put forward.
Thank you very much, Director. I think, yes, I mean, any form of mitigation or compensation would be welcomed, I'm sure. I'll take the convener, Councillor Graham, and then Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Colin for what he's just said there. I think it's really important that as a council we do try and make sure that people are safe in their homes, and that they shouldn't be having to scrabble around to keep themselves warm. And it doesn't give anybody any confidence that hopefully within the next few months that they may not need so much. But the reality is it's going to be hugely expensive for every household in the islands. The other thing I was going to speak to was the programme for housing, and certainly declaring an interest being a council member on HHP, but the additional 4 houses that are to be built at Comhairle is a very welcome development. There are already 4 houses that were built some 3 years ago, and The other thing I would ask is that the care unit at Erista should also be converted into a home for someone, because otherwise it's just going to decay and it's going to cost an awful lot more to bring back into service. So I certainly appreciate the efforts that have been gone to. And finally, I think there are different ways of providing affordable housing across the islands. I think we should pursue that with government. And I know there have been discussions between the leader and Comhairle about how that can be done in a way that is affordable for the people who are going to live in these houses, because we have a massive amount of funding being allocated to our local authority, much more than anywhere else across Scotland other than the big cities. But I think it's really important that we use that money, we use it well, and we give young people an opportunity to have houses before they become 50 and 60-year-olds. So I think it's really important that we pursue that as much as we can.
Thank you very much. Now, Councillor McLean.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, let me say that it's very encouraging to see the amount of houses that's been 6, 7, and the spread between urban and rural areas. It's really encouraging. That's the first thing. But let me come in now to the other side. When I'm encouraging, I now go to the discouraging part of my. I'm sure. But the thing is that the rhetoric over the past 5 years in this chamber has always been to encourage young people to stay, to young people to build houses. But I would say there are barriers. And there are barriers being put on young people to build houses. First of all, there is planning restrictions. There is, and I would say, if there's an element that I've had in the past 5 years, it's people coming to me about the planning restrictions that are being imposed upon them before they even start. And I think some of them are, to be quite honest, I can use the word draconian to say the least. Some of these are outlandish as well. And I do think that we really have to go back and see, let us be more sympathetic to our community and to the areas that we're living in when these young people are building houses. That's the first, and I think we have to look into that. The second thing is the provision of services. Now, the provision of services within our communities is good. But I'll give you an example in our village in Upper Comhairle. Over the past years, the Gracings have given quite a bit of land, being quite honest with you. They've been very charitable and given quite an awful lot of land. And there's an area, when they do build houses, they build houses one after the other, so that there's a development formed. So there's an area in Upper Comhairle where there are 5 houses. And the furthest away houses happen to have, I think there's about 5 or 6 children in both houses. Problem is, the refuse lorry will not come in. The refuse lorry will not come in because they cannot turn in a suitable turning place. The turning place has to be tarred. Now, really, honestly, each person builds their house that little bit, and to tar an area of ground right up to the house is costly in the extreme. Now, I'm not saying that the authorities should tar every house that goes forward. Far from it. These people have developed it. Most of them have put in tarring. But for instance, at the very end, there is an area that the family have built, and they've built their home, but there is not a suitable. In my mind, I would turn my car. If I had a lorry, I would turn my lorry. But for some reason or other, there is this restriction on the refuse lorry going in and turning. So what happens is they have to take their bins all the way along the road. And today, for instance, I would count 14 bins at the end of the road. What's it like today? Day like today, you've got scattered, you've got refuse throughout the whole of the road. Now, my contention is that there should be, again, we should be giving allowances. Why does the refuse lorry could go in today, right, very easily, but it's a track that the individual himself has made, but they won't go in because it's not tarred. That is, now to me, that is restrictive, too restrictive, and I think we have to look at giving the opportunity these families the opportunity to at least encourage them that there was people, bin lorries going in, rather than them having to go and collect their litter at there. So these two things that I would say, let us look at encouraging people in planning terms and in the provision of services. I'm just making a point of that.
Yeah, thank you very much, and very valid there too. And going back to just my own knowledge of the service again, I know that they do undertake a risk assessment of which roads and tracks that they are able to go on, and there may be some very good reasons why they're not. But I think going back to what we were talking about earlier and using maximum flexibility, I know the director and in some of the discussions, one of the things we've been talking about and looking at is whether some preliminary site development work and on service development could be part of this new flexibility that we're seeking from government. And I recognise exactly what the nature of the problem is when you get an iterative development along what was a small track to one house suddenly becomes a track to half a dozen houses, and it is like that. And the council have not adopted the road. The road has maybe not been built to the standards of loading that a road would be, and for these reasons, and for the potential damage it could cause for the heavy 30-ton lorry going along these roads, they find that they're not able to go along. So I do recognise that the problem, and there are sometimes very good reasons why they're not able to go along these roads. But to address the core problem, I think if we can look at some of the flexibilities that we are seeking at the moment to develop some service sites to allow developments like these to take place, I think that would address the problem that you've described there very, very effectively. I don't know if, Director, do you want to make any comment on that?
Thanks, Chair. Just some brief comments. And as you say, service sites and putting plots in place is one of the flexibilities that the government have agreed that we can look at and deliver. In regard to planning restrictions, more than happy to go back and review elements within the planning legislation we use. And if members do have examples of draconian and outlandish, things within planning, I'm more than happy for these to be brought to my attention and to try and speak to do something about that. But we do have specific design guidelines and various other guidelines that we have to adhere to. I would hope none of that is draconian and outlandish, but more than happy to review anything that any member considers draconian and outlandish. And I think the Chair has addressed the issue in the refuse vehicles. And I think Councillor McLean has a specific example in mind. I'll be more than happy to review that example and see what can be achieved. But there has to be a balance in regard to the road surface and what is safe for a refuse lorry or any other vehicle to use. But happy to discuss further with Councillor McLean and review the specific example he's got.
Yeah, Councillor McLean, you have
thanks,
the Director here to.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the Director for reply. The first thing I would say is just look at linear development. Linear planning development. It's ridiculous. That's what. Maybe I'll take the term from draconian to ridiculous. But the other one is service sites. These sites that have gone in, where there are, in this instance, there are 5 or 6 houses. They are already serviced sites by the individuals. So to say that we will look at serviced sites, yeah, usually that's the authority that services these sites or gets an area to do that, or HHP. But these people have done it out of their own pocket by doing the road that little bit further and so on, where there was what we used to call a peat road. So they have already serviced it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think in terms of the servicing, it's preparing an area that meets all the requirements for the likes of fire vehicles, refuse vehicles, in the nature of the design of the road. And of course, there's the basic services of water and electricity as well, that if all of these things could be worked together. But I think it would be very difficult to retrospectively look at these areas now. But you have the Director's commitment to talk further on that anyway.
I'll speak to him after.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. John Mitchell, Harrison, South Lochs. Could I add my own congratulations to the housing allocation that Calamian referred to, particularly in Tarbert. I have to confess there were times when 2 or 3 times to attempt the foundations, I thought they would never see the housing in the old police site in Tarbert, but I'm very glad to see that's the case. And I would reiterate what Councillor McLean said about the desire, the conscious desire to ensure that housing is spread not only in the Stornoway area but out to the rural areas as well, as we are committed to do so. And you know, next Tuesday is a formal meeting, and I hope to be there myself. Could I perhaps ask that this is really just the start? I don't think I need to remind the Chamber about the chronic level of costs of land plots and housing in Luscantire and South Harris, which really precludes many of the local young people in Harris from even getting near a housing ladder. And one attempt to try and to sort that situation out is the proposed accommodation block in Tarbert. Now, it's a modular one, and I know that Calamian will be well. I mean, my colleague, Councillor Fulton, is more aware of this than perhaps I am, but I'm equally aware that the Cabinet Secretary sought an innovative project, and I think that a modular accommodation is a much more economic means of ensuring that we address the problems in the hospitality sector, in the care sector, in the education sector, and the Harris community at large, to try and address the chronic housing situation. So I see the Tarbert, the police block, as a start, and basically my question is, what stage is the funding? I know there's been a few stalls in trying to attract the necessary funding, but could I address to Calamian what stage you are at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and your interest. I know that sectoral support in a number of key geographic areas throughout the Western Isles is something that is being looked at, and the lack of housing for incoming work, and we do need people to come into our rural communities in order to populate and to service the needs of the various industries that we have. If we do not have accommodation for people, then these industries will simply relocate elsewhere as well. So, Director, I don't know if you want any comment on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Harris Accommodation Project was one of the ones we specifically mentioned to the Cabinet Secretary, and it is the project we want to take forward early to government just to test the appetite for flexibility. Then there are some challenges with the project. I think when you're talking about businesses, the housing programme cannot put support to individual businesses, so it has to be developed on a sectoral basis. So you're helping a sector rather than an individual business. And similarly, a modular accommodation unit isn't housing in the traditional sense, so it isn't a house for a family. So usually in the housing programme, that's what the government wants to see coming out the other end. So we've opened discussion with officials. We've had a number of discussions, and we're exploring our way through that. So I think the project will have to be modified, hopefully small modifications to meet what the government requires. But there's an active ongoing discussion on, and we're hoping to submit a formal request or application in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you very much for that, Director. I see Councillor Carl Macmillan, you're waiting to come in. Councillor Macmillan, do you wish to come in, and then Councillor Mackenzie? Well, can we just go to Councillor Mackenzie just now? And I can see Councillor Macmillan's coming in. Away you go, Colin.
Thank you, Chairman. It's to do with section 6.6 of the report. And although I welcome the additional houses in Uist, it fails to mention that a number of houses have also been sold. And I think our net units, including the ones currently on site, is +1. So it doesn't quite tell the whole picture that HHP has sold a number of houses, whilst others have been built. So it might be something that would also affect other parts of the islands where the houses by HHP that have been sold don't form part of the picture. So we're not looking at an increase in overall housing stock when it's compared to what was there before. We've got a much less of an increase to what was to what we had than what the report might suggest. So it's something that could be raised with HHP, that to look at the net increase in housing as well as the new build, which in themselves are welcome, but we could also do with having a more true picture of what's available and what's out there. And secondly, I find myself unable to disagree with Councillor McLean. We had a report, I think, to this committee, or perhaps to the Sustainable Development Committee, that the approval rate for housing was 99.7% or 97 point something. It was certainly within, you might say, it's scores that I had never got when it comes to being out of 100%. So that's why I looked at it. And I think it was one house or one application in 300 and something would be refused. Now, as a member of the Planning Applications Board, we have refused more houses than that in the past few years. So, and that doesn't include people who come asking for advice and help. And what we have to get away from, and the last 2 years must be a reminder, is the design to fail, or the design to trip people up or put spanners in the spokes. We have to try and allow people to help themselves. And if that means that we are facilitative, we have to be doing that. And further, to get houses built, we have to have the Cali Timber lorry or the McInnes Brothers lorry or the equivalent Bain Morrison lorry up to the house in the first place. So surely to goodness, the heavy lorry issue will have been tested in the building of the house. But that's a separate thing that has to be addressed. But we have to change the planning service, and although that's not part of this committee, the provision of housing and people helping themselves to build housing has got to be something that we have to promote as part of this committee's business. I don't know what your own view on that is, Chairman, but that's my view, that we have to be more facilitative to people who are looking to develop their own housing without any form of assistance other than being allowed to go and do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Macmillan. I entirely agree, and I think the local development plan for the local authority has almost throughout all of the land area a presumption of development, so that unlike many areas where swathes of land are precluded from development, almost all of our land areas are permissible for development from the outset. Of course, individual applications have to be assessed in terms of what our planning officers have, the rules and regulations and guidance that they have to follow as well. So sometimes we do have to get necessary, if not welcomed information, including the specification for roads that have to be developed and turning spaces and things like that when properties are built off the main roads. But I think the general policy of the Comhairle has always been a sympathetic one to enable development to take place in the vast majority of areas that are suitable for development. And I do commend that the planning officers are there, and they do a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes of guiding and assisting people prior to application and in the process of application itself. So I do not see them as an obstacle. I see them as an aid and an assistance to people who want to undertake development. There's a whole lot of other factors that come into play, of course, as well. But I certainly do not want any anything that prevents development from taking place where it is reasonably possible for these developments to take place. And said if the young people in our communities want to be afforded the maximum opportunity to aspire to having a home in whatever tenure that may be. Councillor Mackenzie, I don't know, Director, do you want to offer any comment?
Just very, very briefly, Chair, I think you've summarised the position yourself there. But I think Councillor McMillan makes an interesting point about net housing, and we will engage with HHP just to find out, how much of their stock has left the housing market, as it were. I suspect, most property that they sell remains in the housing market in one way or the other. But we can explore with HHP and come back with some statistics around that. In regard to planning. Planning officers, utilise the local development plan and the specific guidance that they are given by the council to deliver. I just do not believe that any planning officer or any other officer of the council deliberately sets out to trip people up or to trying to prevent development happening. If members again do have specific examples of that, I'm more than happy that you bring them to me and I'll investigate and explore that. Officers apply the development plan that has been agreed by the council, and we do not, set up to trip up or, prevent development in any inappropriate way.
Thank you very much, Director. Vice Chair, do you want to? Councillor Mackenzie.
Ray Mackenzie, Stornoway South. Thank you, Chairman. It's really, I suppose it connects with both HHP and the council, and partly to do, I suppose, with the question that's just been taken. A number of years ago, there was discussion about the site up at Cotill, and the HHP part of it, the houses that are already built are built on the lowest part, I would take it, of the site. And of course, there's a care home still to come. Now, my question is, has there been, or is there any possibility that there could be any difficulties with the drainage of that site now that we've got houses there and that the care home is progressing?
Thank you very much, Councillor McCain. I do recall that in the process of the development, sustainable urban development drainage system had to be developed, a SUD system, and the drainage at the lower end was particularly a point of focus in the design and development of that site. I think a consultation with SEPA and all other interested parties would have addressed the concerns that you had. Certainly, I do recall myself that area was an area quite low lying, and in high tide situations, the lower end of Sand Street and these areas, they do tend to have the water coming up, and the drains have at times been a problem there. But I expect that all of these things have been addressed in the design. I know they were raised, and a drainage system had to be specifically developed to address these concerns. So I do not expect there to be any residual elements that have not been addressed in order to avoid any problems in the future. So I don't know, Director, do you want to?
Nothing to add to that, Chair. That would have all been addressed in the technical assessments made of the planning, and that would have been designed out at the time. So there were concerns at the time, but the technical solutions brought in will have addressed these concerns.
Councillor McLean.
Yeah, just to clarify to the Director, I was not getting at individual planning officers at all. It's what I am criticising is the application of the regulations. In the application of the regulations, some of these regulations may be appropriate for urban or rural areas on the mainland. What I'm saying is that there should be leeway for crofting communities in the islands. That's all I'm asking, and that these leeways are taken into consideration rather than applying the book or applying the regulations as they are written.
I think number 10 Downing Street may have some equal comments for exemption and exception from the information that we've been getting in the past few days. But yes, there is a serious point there, and I know in the discussion that you will have with the director, you can raise these. I'm seeing Councillor Steele. You want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Paul Steele, South USA Escape Bar and Battersea. First of all, thanks for the report. Really interesting to see the statistics, and it's good to hear the discussions are going well with government in terms of getting the bit more flexibility on spending the money on housing. The point I was going to raise was just going back to the 55-45 split. Like I say, 6.7 is good. There's lots of sites. The split looks about right, but I'm just looking at 6.6, and we've got 126 units on site currently, 96 in the Stornoway area and 30 throughout the rest of the islands, and then 92 going through assessment, 72 in Stornoway and 20 in the rest of the islands. That doesn't come close to a 55-45 split. So just, and I'm sure long term, and I think in the SHIP there are figures that'll balance that out, but just at the moment it still doesn't look quite evenly spread out across the islands.
Thank you very much, Councillor Steele. I know that the Comhairle development itself, because of its nature and scale at this stage of the programme, does skew the figures. But as was mentioned previously, one of the things I think I'm particularly pleased about is that since this council came in, the focus and on rural areas and ensuring that there is development, where previously we've been advised that there was no interest or need or demand. At each turn when there is a rural development, these homes are being occupied and adding to the sustainability of these rural communities. So I think perhaps it's just one of the elements of that skews it at the moment is just the nature and scale of this at this stage in the programme. But I think we do look at the split that is our policy to ensure that we go as close as possible to that. And that is subject to land becoming available and other factors as well. I don't know if the director, do you want to add anything to that?
Just add to that, Chair, that over the life of the programme, we are still reasonably confident that we will hit the 45-55 target. But in each year you may have a development in Stornoway that is significantly bigger than the developments that are happening in other parts of the island. So in the year there may be variations, but over the life of the programme, we're reasonably confident based on the SHIP that the council approved at the end of last year that we will get to the target.
Thank you very much, Director. Convener, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks. Just very briefly, with regard to the situation we're currently in, the Croft House grant scheme is pretty much disappeared. There are very few people who are able to use that now, and I do think that with the opportunity that we have with government, that we should be encouraging that housing be built in appropriate places. And Grayson's committees are perfectly happy to give up pieces of land to allow young people, and not necessarily all young people, but to turn it into a community in itself. And I think it's really important that we do that with the finance that we have over the next 5+ years.
Thank you very much, Convener. I know you've been particularly active in ensuring that we do get housing development across the Western Isles and have been strongly advocating for that. And I'm pleased that the programme is where it's at the moment. But I think it does need to be monitored to make sure that we do provide opportunities. And of course, housing is only one of the components of sustainability in the rural communities, and having jobs, having opportunities to live, having opportunities in other aspects, and connectivity, which is becoming particularly important for our generation. All of these elements are being progressed, I think, across the whole range of services of the council. So, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the planning briefly, I'm not sure how many houses are refused planning, new houses. As someone who sees plans every week, and I work continually on brand new houses, and I don't see many plans being rejected, to be honest. Yes, there are problems with some plans, but usually the house builder and the planning department come to an agreement and are able to work these things out. So I think, I think it's been sort of portrayed as if we're refusing plans left, right, and centre, and I don't think that's the case. Not that I'm seeing anyway. I've priced hundreds of houses before they even go to the planning stage, and we got quite a lot of these jobs, and not one has been knocked back on planning. Yes, there has been problems with various different things, but they usually work these things out. So I think that it's maybe a case of if there is a problem, people working together better than they are. So there's no difficulties with plans and with young people getting ahead to build houses. But I certainly don't see a lot of planning applications refused in my own work.
Thank you very much. Perhaps that might be something that could be reflected back when we see. But I think my own perception is, and anecdotally, is there's very, very limited. And their planning officers, they do have rules and regulations to follow themselves, and they're conveying that, and they're advising developers. And sometimes developers are individuals who have not got the experience of knowing what the rules and regulations are. And I really do commend. I know they work very hard to try and ensure that development does take place, but that it takes place in the right place at the right time and in the right proportions for our communities. So I'm sure it's not a criticism of officers, as Councillor McLean has said, but we have to remember that the development plan, it's our development plan they're following. We've set the strategic direction that they should be following in terms of where development takes place. The rest is just adhering to what our Scottish Government planning rules and regulations as well. So they do a tremendous amount of work, and I do value. I've seen just how hard they work to try and ensure that development does take place and assisting applicants. Councillor Mitchell, would just make this the final point on this one.
Thank you, Chair. John Mitchell, Harrison South Lochs. Just to pick up the point that the convener made a minute or so ago, I think that the grazing committees do have a part to play here. I mean, if I could just wear my hat as the clerk and secretary to the Jerry Clayton Kingibe Grazing Committee just outside Tarbert, we are actually trying to identify plots of land and offer them to local families to encourage people to stay here at affordable rates. And it's something that I'm actively involved in, trying to encourage other grazing committees throughout Harrison, obviously throughout the Western Isles. I know many of my colleagues in chamber here are on grazing committees that see the benefit of that. So it's just a point I would like to pick up and reinforce from the convener. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mitchell. Okay, then we've had a good discussion on that. I don't think there's no other performance issues to be picked up on the report.
Nothing additional from my perspective, Chair.
Okay. Right, insofar as the committee's interests are concerned, do members agree to note the report? Thank you. Reports outstanding. I notice there's one on there. We expressed and indeed welcomed a proposal to have the FOIA make a presentation to committee for various reasons that wasn't possible. I'm still keen that at some point they come back just to apprise us of the work that they do and the support that they offer to people in our communities. So whether that's within the term of this council or whether it carries over into the next one, I think that's something that's very helpful to inform us of the nature of the support and work that they do. And I would hope that would carry over into the next well, either onto the next meeting or possibly onto the next council. So that is a report standings there for noting. The last item on our agenda was a late item agreed to. Members may have noted that there was no report from Health and Social Care on our agendas prior to a couple of days ago. Given the significance of this area of work, I felt that we should endeavour to accommodate this as a late report. I learned just from at the beginning of the meeting that the Chief Officer of Health and Social Care has actually declined to present the report, which leaves me to look to Mr. Barr for to speak to the report insofar as you're able. I am slightly concerned that we don't have the Chief Officer of Health and Social Care, given its importance to the work that we do within the council and across boundaries with the NHS. It's somewhat disappointing that we don't have the Chief Officer here to speak to the report, but whether members would wish to carry this forward and have it considered at a later date, or would you wish to see what Mr. Barr has to say?
Chair.
Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe it'd be worthwhile. I know these reports sometimes come up at policy and resources. Would putting it on the policy and resources agenda would give members time, because I would feel uncomfortable noting a report that I haven't fully looked at. So, or maybe another at the horizon of PNR. But I think members need to have the time to read the report. Thanks.
Before I just ask Mr. Barrett to come in, say the leader, just to come in on that.
You know, I sympathise with anybody who says they haven't had time to read it, I have to say, and to comment on it. But even if you had that time, I still think it's not a report that we should go through, and given that the Chief Officer hasn't turned up and he's accountable for the report, and therefore I think that whatever we do, if we discuss it later and we have the report later, we have to have the Chief Officer here as he's accountable for it. And it's unacceptable that he's not here. So, but before that, maybe Mr. Burke could give us some update. That's
Chief Executive.
Yes, Chair, thanks. And to pick up Mr. Murray's point, I mean, all that you can do today is note the report, and you may or may not feel comfortable in doing that, because obviously I cannot speak to the details of the management of health and social care. What I can do, though, is comment on paragraph 8, and for the avoidance and for total transparency, the financial performance section has been amended by me on the advice of the Comhairle's Chief Finance Officer, whose advice I was happy to accept. So it sets out the position on the finances for Goat Hill, particularly as the Chief Officer has written, them, but not accepting the point of view which the IGB enunciated at its meeting last week. And the reasons for that is as follows. I refer particularly to paragraph 8.15, which notes the IGB deficit. There is a deficit, of course, in the IGB, and there has been for years. That's not just about Goat Hill by any means. And I'll refer to the second sentence there. The indications that the local authority payment to the IGB for the next financial year will be flat cash plus the ring-fenced monies. That's anticipating your decision, and it's your decision. But our practice in the past has been to give the IGB ring-fenced funding, of course, but also to give it flat cash, which is, in our sad financial position, actually to give it almost to give it an increase, because other services in the Comhairle, of course, have not had flat cash. They've had service reductions to make. We have never ever passed on service reductions to the IGB. So that's an assumption based on the Comhairle's past practice. But those ring-fenced monies or directed spend are significant. Those 200 million across Scotland. Our share of that is probably around £2 million. That has a specific role, amongst other purposes, to support pay and sustainability of social care services. That, in my opinion at least, and in Norman MacDonald's opinion, is exactly what the issue is with Goat Hill. We've always known there was likely to be a revenue deficit with Goat Hill to add to the other revenue deficits of the IGB, and we all know what we've said over many years about the unsustainability of health and social care across the board. Government knows that. If you saw the Audit Scotland report last week on social care services, you will note that it could have been written by us for our area. In fact, it's written for all of Scotland. So we have to manage that. The IGB has to manage that. And we believe with that additional funding, it is an option open to the IGB to apply that funding in a way that enables the new model of care which Goathill represents to go ahead. So these discussions need to take place with the IGB and with the integrated corporate management team. So that's the position. The rest of the report is entirely as written by the Chief Officer, and I'm afraid I can't probably assist you much with the details of that. So all I would ask you to do is note what I've said. You can, of course, defer the report to the March series. There will be a final quick 1 week series of meetings in March so that we deal with necessary business before the pre-election period. So there's an opportunity there for the committee to meet and consider that report. And of course, by then, the Comhairle will have set its budget, and I hope to be in a position, along with Norman MacDonald, to speak about various aspects of finance, including Goathill. So I'll leave it. I'll leave it there, Chair. It's up to the committee how to proceed. Councillor Murray is. I don't think it would be right to put the whole Health and Social Care report on Policy and Resources Committee, but I can certainly refer to the financial aspect as I have today, because that's clearly a matter for Policy and Resources as well.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for the long explanation there, Chair. I hope that's helpful.
Well, it's helpful, if not disappointing, that we don't have the Chief Officer who doesn't feel inclined to come to the committee and speak to the report. Members, I don't know, I mean, as the Chief Executive said, this was all news to me at the beginning of the meeting, that we weren't going to have the Chief Officer to speak to the report. Mr. Barrett suggested that we note the report at this stage, but have a further report come back to committee. I mean, this is the committee that has to which the Chief Officer reports for the performance of the IJB. In the same way as we've had Scottish Fire and Rescue reporting its performance, it is right and appropriate that we do have that overview and these reports. Of course, the direct strategic management of the services are through the IJB, but nevertheless we are one of the two partners that impact and provide services and provide staff to the IGB in order to deliver the range of services. I think it's extremely disappointing that we're not able to have a discussion on it today without appropriate officers to answer. But is it something you would wish to note at this stage? And Leader, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think whether we note it or carry it forward, I don't think we can discuss it, as I said, because we don't have the Chief Officer here, and it wouldn't do it justice to do that. And it's a serious and important issue. We've got a flagship development there, which we are working really, really hard to get done in a very difficult circumstance around COVID, Brexit, and everything else. So we really have to ensure that we come to the right conclusions about this and right decisions. So I would suggest that we do have this at the committee in March. It gives us time to find out what exactly the thinking is behind some of the decision making that we heard from the IJB, and it'll give plenty of time, hopefully, for the Chief Officer to put it in his diary rather than find out that he's not available next week for PNR. So I think it deserves to come to the committee for a full discussion with the Chief Officer in March, and that'll be my proposal if members are happy with that.
Thank you, Leader. That sounds, given the circumstances we find ourselves in, I think it's possibly the sensible way forward. Are you happy to do that? Reluctantly, as I know I am, but nevertheless we are where we are.
I've had my light on for some time. Thanks, Chairman. Well, thanks Mr. Burr for his report, having been landed with it at the last minute, and appreciate that, you know, there's areas that he can't cover. I'm not quite sure. I don't think I've ever had circumstances before when an officer who should be presenting the report says he refuses to attend. I don't know if he was.
Well, can I just say that I'm not quite sure of what the circumstances are. Is not.
You would say he's not inclined, so I'm not sure if he's ill or whatever the reason.
Exactly. I don't know.
Anyway, to go past that, I would like to have seen it coming forward a bit quicker than the next committee, but if it has to be, if the PNR can't cover the matter entirely, then I don't see any alternative, which is very unfortunate actually at this stage. One question I do have on the thing is, or one point that I would like to make is that, and this is something I've brought up time and time again, that pre-Cotil, excuse me, do you want me to carry on? Oh.
I apologize. I was just,
yeah,
taking advice from
well,
the...
I mean, do you want to? Okay, all right. Pre-Cotil, it says the number of beds were 82, and post-Cotil at 86. Now, I think that should be looked at very in great depth, actually, when it comes to PNR, the committee next month, because this is not satisfactory at all with the situation, the demographic of the community. To increase it by 4 beds, it's just not enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackenzie. Apologies, I was just taking advice from one of the officers when you were speaking there. I don't think we can really go into much detail now, since we don't have the chief officer, who is the appointed person to speak to the report. I think it's been suggested that we just consider this at a meeting in March, which reluctantly is the only thing that we can do in the circumstances. Councillor McLean, do you want to on that? I don't want to go into really.
No, I'm not going into any detail at all. I would have gone into detail if the chief officer was here, because it's a very important report. Absolutely, as somebody said, it was a flagship. This is really to just dismiss this with 10 minutes, or even to add it onto a PNR. But I don't think that would, as an add-on. I almost think that this should almost be a special meeting, almost. But anyway, we've had enough of special meetings, I'm sure. So, but one question I would like to ask is if we do put it into the March meeting, will that affect the budget setting? Because prior to that, we do the budget setting. If we had the chief officer here, there's figures down there that you know, well, if anybody sees the amount of red that I'm looking at here, it's obviously going to affect the budgets. Is it? So I can ask Mr. Burr if that would affect a budget setting exercise in the next couple of weeks.
Well, Chair, I think that's a very good question from Councillor McLean, and I think my answer to it is very clear that it is up to the council to set its budgets and set its priorities, but the indicative settlement from government at the moment provides directed or ring-fenced funding for health and social care services, which we are expected to pass on to for these services. My suggestion to you will be, and Norman MacDonald's will be, that we adhere to our current practice of giving the IGB flat cash, which, as I've said, is actually a better deal than many of our own statutory services. But flat cash plus the ring-fenced funding, that if that amounts to around £2 million, I too am a bit alarmed at the reds here, but it is not anywhere near £2 million. It is then, in my opinion, for the IGB to prioritise its own services, as we all have to, and live within its financial means. I very much hope, and I would be amazed if the IGB chose not to prioritise Goat Hill, given it is not just all the good things it is, but it's also a new model of care, the combined care home and housing with extra care. So my view is the Comhairle should provide the means for the IGP to do that. And that, so having the report in March, to answer your original question, will not affect that negatively, provided the Comhairle passes on these sums for health and social care.
Thank you very much, Chief Executive. I'm saying, just to make this the last, because we were, I think, agreed that we're not going to go into the detail of this since we don't have the appropriate people to speak to it. Councillor Colin McMillan, just make this the last point on it.
Thank you, Chairman. It wasn't to do with the report specifically, but Callum McLean mentioned there something that I was going to take up, and it's to do with how do we set a budget with the IJB. But that was the secondary part. I'll go to the first part, which is the people that I see doing the operational work for home care and effectively the IJB, and the management who are involved in the operational or the more operational side of it. These people, they do their absolute best, and yet, as per the previous item that we had with the 5 years and the home care, is there an issue with the framework, what you might call the statutory framework of the IJB? Because the council has a statutory framework, the health board has a statutory framework. Is the IJB, which is between stools, does that have a less of an issue with statutory setup? And is that part of the problem that we're looking at in terms of trying to get a handle on the issue that was mentioned at the previous report? Because as an occasional member of the IJB council representative, at the last round of meetings before last week, there was an issue which had come up where effectively, and I would hope the Chief Executive can keep me right, that the council would be responsible for any overspend. And I thought on first reading that was quite off-centre. And then there was a meeting to say, yes, that's exactly what it was. So, and as a member of the IGB yourself, Chair, is there a way that we as Comhairle can be more proactive in setting management responsibilities or setting the way that things are done in the IJB, particularly in terms of cash and how that is expended in terms of either overspend or curtailing the service or addressing the service to meet the amount of finance that we can put towards it. So mine is more of a conceptual approach question, and I wonder if the experts could give their view on where they see it and how we, as we set a budget, and those of you who are in the next Comhairle, how you set and see that going forward. So I shall leave it at that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barr, do you want to just give a quick response to that? I know that the IGB is certainly set up within a statutory framework, and it is responsible for the budgets that are allocated to it by both the council and NHS. But any member who is sitting on the IGB is there to represent the best interests of the IGB. We're not there as particularly to represent the interests of the council, but obviously the knowledge and experience that we have within the council will impact on our involvement in the IGB as well. Mr. Barr, do you want to?
Very briefly, Chair, Councillor Millen makes extremely good points. The IGB is the interface of local authority funded, a local authority approach to funding, which is to set the budget very strictly and then live within it, subject to environments as approved by members or within tolerances. NHS funding is different. It is overspends are, I have to watch my financial language here, overspends are frequently met by government. There are means provided, gearing, borrowing, whatever, to allow that to happen, and it is a different form of budgeting. But the IGB follows local government funding rules, and you know, as a matter of personal view, I agree with Councillor Macmillan that the time may be that for the Comhairle to be quite directive as to how the funding which it provides is spent. But how consistent is that with the partnership that is meant to be the integration joint board? And that is why I don't agree with the view that is put that if there is a deficit on Goat Hill, the bill is simply sent to Policy and Resources Committee. Those of you who have been on the IGB since its inception will recall there were significant overspends on what I'll call the NHS side, from prescriptions, from GP, from other primary care services in the early days, and it was the Comhairle's funding that built up what was then the IGB's reserves. We did not say this is an NHS overspend, so NHS meet the bill. Similarly, yes, there's a funding deficit with Goat Hill, of course there is, it's all our staff, and we need more staff. That's the issue actually, is recruitment of staff rather than the deficit. But the deficit is shared. That's what integration, that's what an integration joint board is all about. I'll leave it there, Chair, but I hope I've answered I've given some information anyway.
Thank you very much. I think we would want to have some detailed input into it, but I don't think we're able to have that today. So I think the decision to have it come back to again in March, where I suspect it will be one of the main items on that agenda, should allow sufficient time to get, and we will, as the Chief Executive has said, we will be in a clearer position in terms of where we are with our own budget allocation for the year ahead. So that being the case, thank you all for your attendance today, and that next meeting will be
it'll be maybe 8th, 9th, 10th March. I haven't agreed that I haven't finalised the timetable yet. It'll depend on the number of reports we have to deal with. It's not expected all the service committees will be tuning that page, purely where there are urgent items to deal with prior to the issue of the notice of election on the 14th of March.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Mackay. Thank you, members. That concludes the business for the meeting today.